It's Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers with tips and advice on landscaping and gardening. Here's Fernando Martinez.
Yes, indeed. We are here, and we got another great show lined up here for you here today, and happy you could be here with us and checking it out. This is the place for all your landscaping and gardening tips, keeping that yard looking gorgeous and beautiful, or helping you get there. Today's show, I wanted to talk about something that I was dealing with this week on a couple different occasions at my house personally and also at one of our clients' places, and that's all about the sprinklers and the sprinkler system. So what I want to go over is how to diagnose when you have a sprinkler problem and how to kind of go down through step by step and see what's actually going on. Also, I'd like to talk about the different ways to program the timer that controls the sprinklers and talk about there's, of course, many different ways of accomplishing the same thing and how to program it to the best of what you're trying to do with your needs at your specific yard. And lastly, I do want to talk a little bit about the maintenance of the systems and taking care of it and making sure that everything's working properly and keeping. It's better to do minor upkeep on your sprinkler system than it is to wait and really have some major problems and then either the plant material is suffering or needs to be replaced by the time you get around to fixing it. It could cause bigger problems. So it's always the same old saying is an ounce of prevention is always worth a pound of cure. So let's get right on into this. How to diagnose properly and easily, methodically, so that you're not kind of chasing your tail trying to figure out, what's going on with the sprinkler system. So I got a call from a client and nothing was working. Sprinklers were not coming on, none of the irrigation, none of the zones, stations. And so I said, obviously I'll head out there, see what's going on, and let's get this diagnosed. So I always start at the main line. You want to see if you have water and water pressure to the valves. And it can happen where there's shut-off valves in front of the valves, and sometimes they can get turned off for whatever reason, and you can forget to turn them back on, or maybe somebody else turned it off, or the gardener, who knows, and there could be no water to the system. So the first thing to check is your main shut-off or any shut-off valves that would be in front of the valves. Those valves are the things that come up out of the ground with the pipes. I think most of us know at this point where you should have usually a bank of them, valves. Do you see them stick them up out of the ground? Those are the anti-siphon valves. Or if you have valve boxes where the underground inline valves can be a little trickier because you got to kind of go out in the field and find them, and hopefully you know where they are or they're marked on a map somewhere. And in that case, you could have multiple shutoff valves in different locations. So it kind of depends on the size of your yard. Most of us at my house and at my client's house here where I went, they had above ground anti-siphon valves. There was five of them in a row there. They got the wires coming off the top, and he did have a shutoff valve in a valve box next to him. Check that. There was water there. Then the second step is I went to the valve itself, and you can turn the valves on manually, and usually there's a little on. It'll say on off marked on there. And it's generally speaking on the solenoid, which is the little black, device coming off the top. Mostly it's black, and it has the wires coming off of it. That's a solenoid. And you can turn the valve on manually there. And if you have water to that valve and you turn the valve on manually, water should come out and the sprinkler should be working. And that's what I did. We turned it on. Sure enough, there was water pressure there and the sprinklers came on. So the third thing, the next item that becomes suspect is that solenoid itself. So I thought to myself, okay, so you've got solenoids are pretty cheaply replaced, and sometimes it's not even that the solenoid's bad. It could be the connection where the wire from the clock is going into the solenoid. And so I looked at those connections there. If they don't have silicone-filled connections, if they look like just regular wire nuts and they're exposed, or even if they don't have wire nuts at all, I've seen that, And if the wires look rusty or corroded, it could very well be a connection at the solenoid. And if that is the case, all you've got to do really is just cut back into some fresh wire on both sides, reconnect it, try it again. In his case here at my client's, all the valves had the silicone fill connectors on them. Another clue that told me it wasn't the solenoids is the fact that all of them didn't work. So it would more likely be a solenoid issue if only one of the valves didn't work and the rest of them were working and you couldn't just get that one to come on. That tells you you've got water pressure to the valves because the other valves are working. And it tells you that the wiring for the most part is working except for the one valve. So it could either be that wire connection to the solenoid or that solenoid itself if it's an individual valve that you're having trouble with. In his case, it was all the valves. It's super, super rare. In fact, I've never seen it where all the solenoids go bad at one time or all the wire connections are all bad at the same time. Highly, highly unlikely. So in my mind, the solenoids were fine and the wire connections looked all fine without me having to take off wire nuts and physically look at the wire. So the next suspect is that wire that's coming from the clock to the valves. So that there's, someone has to put that in and you've got to really, it's hard to know where that wire is, except for the original installer, and they can be cut So I usually ask the question of what has been done. Has you planted any new plants recently? Has there been any work done, a mow strip, or did somebody come in and pour concrete or pound stakes to put in form boards or anything work-wise that's been done recently? And did that valve or valves or sprinkler, whatever, not work in conjunction with that time frame, so that you can kind of get a clue. And it's the same with even with landscape lighting, with the lighting wire. One light will be out and then say, oh, we planted this orange tree, a week ago, and that week that light didn't work, so it's seemingly obvious, but not always. I want you to think about what's been done and, especially shovel work or any kind of digging. So it turns out that wire was fine going back to the clock. And the clock now becomes the next suspect, and it appeared to be working. It was on, it had power, we're pushing manual, and the valves are not coming on. So what I did was I said, okay, well, this is a computer, because all sprinkler timers, you have some sort of computing aspect to them. And as we know, sometimes computers need to be rebooted. They're not just going to work and work, forever. So this can save you a lot of headache. It can get you through the process pretty quickly. I was there for maybe 10, 15 minutes and we figured it out. So it ended up being the sprinkler timer. And so I unplugged it from the wall and took the power out. And I took the backup battery out of it at the back so that it truly went all the way down and turned off. Now, you do lose the program in this case, and you're going to have to reprogram the clock, but it's worth it because you want it to work. So, and that's what we did. And then every clock usually has a way to reset. And so that's exactly what I did. Was I plugged the clock back in after about 10, 15 seconds. I don't know, maybe it was 30 seconds. And then I put the backup battery back in. I did do some checking to the wiring. This might be a little advanced. If you have any kind of weather sensor, in this case it was a Hunter clock, and you can put a solar sync on there. You can put a remote. So I took the face of the clock, and there's a little hinge. You pop the little knuckle, and it hinges back, and you can see all the wiring behind the face of the clock. And he did have a smart port hooked up. And so I checked the wiring to that. I made sure that the jumper was on the sensor because he didn't have a solar sync or any kind of weather sensor, a rain gauge, or whatever you might have on the clock. That would be another thing to check. If you do have a rain gauge, if it's, not letting, even if the rain gauge is malfunctioning, even though it's not raining, It could be malfunctioning and not allowing the whole clock to come on, even though it appears though the clock was working. In this case, he did not have one. And I checked the wires to the smart port that would be for a remote if you had a remote, and everything was fine and wired correctly. So I did a reset on it, which you have to look at the manual. The resets aren't always as easy as you would think. Just pushing, there is a reset button on the back, but in this case, I had to hold down the right arrow, the program key, and the minus button, and all at the same time, and then push the reset button. It's kind of silly how they do that, but you've got to look it up. If you don't have a manual, thank goodness for the internet. You can look up your sprinkler model, just type in anything and, how to reset whatever sprinkler clock, and it'll come up. So that's what we did. I reset the clock. We put it all back together, close the face back up and set a manual station, and all of a sudden they're all working. So that was the experience there, and I think that kind of walks you through. I wanted to talk about it today because I would do the exact same thing no matter what the problem was, because different problems for different things, everything will come up in that process. You start from the water source and work your way all the way back to the timer. It's somewhere in there, whatever the issue is, you're going to find it. So that's, at my house, I had an issue with the solar sink itself. I have a wireless solar sink on mine, and my sprinklers were not coming on, and it turned out the device was malfunctioning. And so I went out there and I just cleaned it off, and there's a little button on that to make sure and tested it that it's communicating wirelessly with my clock. And I just kind of went through the whole program and kind of rebooted it, and then all of a sudden it works again now. So, they're not something that's I think, my clock's been in there 10 years. They're pretty reliable. I haven't really had to do a whole lot in that time. And so I'm not surprised if every once in a while you got to go out there and reboot things or clean off the sensors and keep those. If you do have rain sensors, weather sensors, rain gauges, or rain shutoff sensors, then they do need to be cleaned and maintained. So that is something to think about there. And your valves and the wires, and make sure you've got those connectors on there. I've done it where the connections are bad, and if you see one bad connection and you see the rest of them all have that same open, just regular wire nut on there, not the silicone filled connectors. I don't know why a lot of installers will put it without those. They don't cost that much more to put the silicone filled connectors on there. Maybe they just didn't have it on the truck or whatever. If one's bad, just go ahead and rewire them all. And it's pretty simple to rewire the valves. I'll tell you briefly, there's a common wire that goes to all the valves, and then each valve gets its own colored wire. And those colors match back at the sprinkler timer with station 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And you match the color to the valve, and that's how the sprinkler knows, the timer knows which valve is what zone. So it's not difficult at all, and it doesn't matter which side of the wire. Each one side of the wire can go to the other side, doesn't matter. So the way it works is the clock on program 1, when it comes on and it's trying to turn on station 1, it sends 27 volts of electricity down that wire over to the solenoid. The solenoid pops, for the length of time that you set it, 10, 15, 20 minutes or whatever. It stays up, and that allows the valve to come on. And then when the time's up, it stops the current from going to the valve, and the solenoid shuts down, and that turns the valve off. So that's kind of how it works. And so those wires need to be connected and connected strong, so you got a good strong signal to pop that solenoid. All right, so now let's talk about the schedule itself and how to program a controller. It's all going to boil down to the different types of sprinkler heads or systems: drip systems, bubblers, sprays, MP rotators, stream rotors, and each one of those different types of heads are going to require different lengths of time. But the main point I want to get across is whatever you figure out the length of time you want, you're going to want to cut it in half and water twice, 2 different start times. So if it's 20 minutes, you're going to do 2 different start times at 10 minutes each. So we're going to talk more about that on the other side of the break, and I also want to talk a little bit about maintenance.
You're listening to Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers on California's Central Coast. Here on 1240 AM and 99.5 FM, KSMA.
This show is brought to you by Airval Block. Concrete paving stones or pavers are not all created equal. Airval Block pavers are created from a dry mix of gravel, sand, cement, and color. With very little water used, they're super strong. They won't crack or fade. And to be an Airval Block paver, the gravel and sand come from right here on the Central Coast, supporting our local community. Airval Block is the only local manufacturer of concrete masonry products like pavers, mortarless retaining wall blocks. Airval Block products are high quality for peace of mind, and there are many colors to choose from. And if you're not sure which products you need or how to use them, you will always get expert advice from the staff at Airval Block. Products made on the Central Coast for the Central Coast. Visit their fully landscaped outdoor showroom to see the many ways you can use Airval Block products at number 1 Suburban Road in San Luis Obispo, or go online at airvalblock.com.
If you're thinking about installing a new paver patio or paver driveway, check out Chaparral Pavers online at ilovetocomehome.com. Serving the Central Coast since 2001, Chaparral Pavers will work with you to get it right and complete the job to your specifications, as customer service is king at Chaparral Pavers. Paver driveways are stylish and durable and guaranteed to never crack. If your old concrete driveway or entryway is a hazardous cracking mess, it's time to call Chaparral Pavers. Go to their website, ilovetocomehome.com. You'll find all the information you need. Check out photographs of past installations and reviews from Central Coast residents who have used Chaparral Pavers. And don't forget, all installations are guaranteed for the life of your home. So check out Chaparral Pavers online at ilovetocomehome.com. Chaparral Pavers, they'll make you love to come home. Now, back to Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers on KSMA.
And we're back. Okay, so yeah, we've been talking about sprinklers and diagnosing sprinkler systems and going over all the kind of ways to check on all these things. And we've been now talking about how to program the timer. And I was just talking about doing 2 start times minimum. Most clocks have up to 4 start times that you can do. And I think you can use them in certain instances, new seed lawns and things like this, where you know, or veggie gardens or things that we're planting and you need them come on throughout the day. But mostly, I would say no fewer than 2 start times should be used. I want you to get away from everything 10 minutes every day, starting 1 start time. I know it's simple and it will keep things alive, but it's really not best. You can save water right away from not watering every day, and you can save water from not having runoff. I don't know anyone's yard that's exactly flat. It wouldn't be a good thing if it was. The water wouldn't be draining away from your house. And so we all have slopes, and the steeper the slope, the faster the water is going to run off. And that's actually another reason for more than 2 start times, is a steep slope area where water starts to run down after 5 minutes, but you're trying to water 20 minutes. You do 4 start times of 5 minutes each time, and you wait in between for the water to soak into the ground, and then you get your 20 minutes of actually water on the plant. You find out you don't need 20 minutes because you're only watering for 20 minutes because most of the water's running off, and you're having to still water while the water's absorbing into the soil. And it kind of depends on the type of soil you have too. As we know, sandy soils are gonna, it's gonna drain in there and get into the soil pretty quickly, but it's also going to drain, away and be drier faster. Heavy clay soils take a lot longer to absorb the water, but once they do, they hold on to that water for a lot longer. So knowing your soil type will help you program your sprinkler timer. That might not be, so intuitive. Wow, I didn't, you don't think of those things normally, but it's huge. and understanding when runoff starts. So the only way to know that is to go out there, turn it on. You have to wait, the 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or whatever you're programming it for, and make sure that water isn't starting to run off and you're continuing to water. And so that's kind of how I set the length of time for a station. Is you go in there and you say, okay, well, after 6 minutes, it starts running off down the curb and down the street. That's a 6 minute start time, length of time for it to run. If that's not enough water, you need 2 start times. So that's a huge point that I wanted to get across today. Drip systems would probably be about the only system that I'd be okay with 1 start time, because they're watering so slow, 1 gallon per hour, 2 gallons per hour, that you may not need 2 start times on that. But again, having said that, even I've seen sloped areas where after 10 minutes, 12 minutes, it's starting to run off. And if you don't have the wells, you're supposed to dig like those little water wells around the plant, especially on slopes. A lot of slopes on the Central Coast, and we landscape a lot on them, and then we run the drip systems across there, and even then it can be running off. But if your yard's pretty level, drip system, 20 minutes, 1 start time, you're probably okay. That's why they have the low flow sprinkler heads. Like I talk about these MP rotators. We've done shows on them in the past. They're lawn sprinklers as opposed to the spray heads. They're very common. Spray heads put out a lot of water really fast. And the MP rotators are this low flow nozzle that puts out 1/3 of the water. It is possible. I have MP rotators on my lawn, and I still do 2 start times to split it up, because it starts to run off and go into the curb and down the street. Those spray heads, 100% for sure you have runoff. They're putting out so much water so fast, the soil doesn't have time to absorb it. Even sandy soils, it will run. And so you've got to break it up and split it up. Right? The minute, if you've got sprays, and a lot of people do, the second it starts going off and down the curb, you're just wasting money and water, and your lawn's not going to be any greener. So very, very important. Now, another common question that I get all the time is when should I water? What time of day should I water? And the most obvious answer to me is in the mornings. Now, why is that? The reason is because if you have low spots, if you have areas where water likes to sit, heavy clay soils or things that don't drain off that good, it can sit all night long if you water in the evening, and it won't dry out until the next day. If you water in the morning, you get all the watering done. And again, the whole wind, probably the worst time to water would be in the middle of the afternoon. We got that Central Coast wind blowing through here, or it's hot, west facing, sun coming in, the water's evaporating before it even hits the ground. So early mornings are the best time to water. Seems like that's become pretty common knowledge these days. But if you're trying to prevent things like, let's say you have rose bushes and you're getting powdery mildew on the roses, well, if you're watering in the late evening and that mildew gets to stay moist all night long, it's not positive. It's not going to be the end of the world if you're watering at night and everything's fine. Great. They're definitely not going to get the evaporation. It's nice and cool. There's usually not windy at night, but the early morning hours are usually the best time to water. I water a little bit later in the morning, and the reason I do that is because I want to see the sprinklers come on. I want to see everything working. I want to see if there's a leak, and that's part of the maintenance aspect of checking those nozzles. So I do it. I can do it every time they come on, because I know that, okay, they're going to, if I hear something weird, we've talked about the drip systems, turning it on and walking around and listening for the sound, looking for obvious signs of leaks. If a head looks clogged or it's not spraying right, you can clean the screens. That's all part of maintaining that system and keeping the rain sensors clean and keeping you loving your yard and having a great experience with your landscaping. So catch us on Facebook, Chaparral Pavers, and submit your question, and you can get that answered here on the air live. And we will see you next week. So have a great week, and we'll see you soon.
This has been Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers. Go to ilovetoComeHome.com to find out more or call 805-588-6917. And be sure and tune in next week at this same time for Patio Side Chat here on KSMA.